Hello and happy Thursday to each and every one of you. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Engineer Your Energy. I'm Caroline Milton, and I help individuals and organizations cultivate a more effective stress management and burnout prevention approach to career and to life. In these weekly episodes, I talk about the mistakes that we're making that might be undercutting our energy, that might be contributing to stress. You see, I'm obsessed with stress. I find it to be fascinating. I think the human body is fascinating. And as a result, I've dedicated myself to truly understanding stress, stress management, the stress cycle, and what we can do differently as individuals and as a collective. So, this week I wanted to talk about some of the mistakes that we make when it comes to uh, the stress cycle and managing our stress. And these are pretty common mistakes that we make. And we see these pop up regularly, right? Whether it is in social media or on television shows or even in conversations with our friends. Some of these might sound really familiar to you, and you might even be shaking your head yes, or raising your hand and saying yeah. That's definitely something that I've done a time or two. So, when we talk about managing our stress, we're not talking about managing our stressors. Now, I talked about this in last week's episode, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but you can always click on my hashtag transforming tired, to find last week's content. So, make sure you catch that. We're talking instead about how to manage the stress, right? So the stress is the physiological impacts of the stressor, the things that are happening inside of our body. When we fail to manage the actual stress that is occurring, it ruminates, right? It festers, it boils within our body from day to day to day. And we carry it forward and we add on top of it until it is just all consuming. And we get to that state of burnout where now our stress cycle is inflexible and we get stuck in stress, in that activation of our stress response. So, some mistakes that we might be making when it comes to managing our stress, that's the focus of what I want to talk about today. The first is self deprecating confrontation. So, putting ourselves in situations where we feel like we're fighting, but we never win. So, we might say things like, I stood my ground, I fought, I stood up for what I thought was right, but to no avail. So, that self deprecating confrontation is not necessarily helping us address our stress, right? We essentially are putting up a valiant hands in the air effort to say, well, we've done our best and we're going to move on. So that self-deprecating confrontation is not actually helping us address our stress. Number two is suppressing our stress. This one's also very, very common, right? We just say, I don't have time to deal with my stress. I don't have the attention to deal with my stress. There are too many things going on in my life. I cannot afford to dedicate any energy towards actually dealing with my stress. And so I'm just going to suppress it. Women experience this a lot, right? We're told to be happy. We're told to smile. We're told that giving up is failure, and we're told to not be confrontational. And so as a result, when we feel stressed out, we feel like it's counterproductive for us to actually stop and deal with this stress. So as a result, I'm just going to suppress it. I'm just going to take a deep breath and move forward, and I'll deal with this some other time. I'll kick that can down the road. And that suppression of our stress is not helping our stress. Number three is avoidance. This might look like numbing, right? This might look like coming home from work, cracking open a beer, and then another beer, and then another beer, and just kind of drowning ourselves in our sorrows and in our stress. It might look like spending a day on the sofa, watching Netflix and thinking, well, this is how I'm going to recover from my stress, is by escaping, by numbing out. And those things can be helpful in short-term quantities, but in the long term, they're not actually helping us effectively manage our stress. In fact, alcohol and sugar can contribute to our experience of stress. So be mindful of that as you are partaking in some short-term numbing. That what are the long-term consequences of this? Might this actually be further increasing my experience of stress? Number 4 is rumination. So we just sit and we ruminate. We think about our stress. We think about how frustrated we are that we're experiencing such significant levels of stress and we're not actually doing anything effective to handle that stress. We're just gnawing our teeth and really considering our own personal plight and festering in that kind of like loathing of our situation. And finally, the last thing that might be undermining your stress management is too much reward within the process. Now, studies have been done to look at intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic reward systems and found that sometimes those are counterintuitive, counterproductive, that we are much more motivated by our intrinsic motivation, right? So internally, what are the things that are spurring us towards change? And this is something that I start every single one of my one-on-one clients with, is finding that primary motivation. What's that intrinsic motivation that is really driving us towards changing our experience of stress, towards changing our daily habits, towards changing our belief systems about how we handle stress. And we have to find that intrinsic motivation to truly find our new pathway forward. Because just rewarding ourselves, and don't get me wrong, I have been guilty of this so many times in the past, right? I can say that I've gotten myself ice cream to reward myself for handling stress or handling a particularly rough day in therapy. But that extrinsic motivation is not going to carry us forward in our overall experience of stress in the long term. So, in review, the things that might be undermining your handling of stress include self-deprecating confrontation, avoidance, rumination, suppressing our stress, and rewarding ourselves too frequently as we pursue change. So, what do we do instead? That's what I'm going to be talking about next week on the next episode of Engineer Your Energy. So, how do you set yourself up for success when it comes to dealing with your stress? Thanks for being here this week. Again, I'm Caroline Milton. I love talking about stress. If you have any questions about stress, burnout, and what you can do to improve your experience of stress, please reach out to me at miltoncc.com, or you can DM me here on this platform. I'd be happy to chat more in detail about this topic. I will be back next Thursday to further this conversation. So if you have anything pertinent to that conversation, please share that with me as well. Thanks for being here. I hope you've learned something today about how to engineer your own energy, and we'll see you next week.